Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode on Beyond Survival. For the whole of this series and again for season 8, I'm joined with Dr. Ruth Callaghan, who is a chartered behavioural psychologist, psychotherapist and clinical supervisor with over 20 years experience, 11 years with the Irish Youth Justice Service and over 10 years in private practice. And it's wonderful to have Ruth here to go through the letters with me. And if anybody wants to contact Ruth, her website is always shared at the bottom of the show notes. Ruth, how's it going?
Going great. Looking forward to getting stuck in.
Yeah, I think we'll just jump in, Ruth.
Lovely.
Hi, Katie and Ruth. Firstly, huge appreciation to you both. Over the course of my life, I could never put into words the confusion I have felt. As a child, when I did try to speak up, I was made feel like everything about me was wrong. But in listening to this podcast and other people's stories, along with the work I have been doing on myself, I now have some peace in the why of it all. The thing is, over the last few years, my youngest child has been diagnosed as autistic. The more I have learned about it and neurodivergence in general, the more I can see that there seems to be a lot of similarities between narcissism and own agenda behaviours. I now believe that neurodivergence is running through both sides of our families, and I am at the stage in my healing where I am trying to move forward with this new reality. I want to forgive so that I can be free. Neither sets of families want to acknowledge that any damage was done and have made it clear that they think I have gone down the autism rabbit hole. So once again, I find myself in the position of being wrong in their eyes. I can live with this. I have set some strong boundaries and I am willing to do whatever it takes to protect my children. I suppose what I am looking for is, in your experience, where is the line between narcissism and own agenda behaviour? Thanks again, Anonymous.
A lot there, Katie.
There is, isn't there? There's so much in such a small letter, really.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering where to start, and I wonder even maybe if I jump to the question when we're talking about the line between narcissism and own agenda behavior before we then look at it when this listener is talking about neurodivergence, autism, autistic, and I suppose, maybe I'll just jump in and start then. The book that I co-wrote, You're Not the Problem, in that we talk about what is healthy narcissism. And there is such a thing as healthy narcissism. But when we talk about narcissism in general and somebody being a narcissist, typically we're referring to NPD. We're referring to, pathological narcissism. But there is healthy narcissism, that part where I exist. I have needs, I have wants, I have preferences. I am entitled to, self-respect, to respect from others, to care. I talked about this in a podcast in the last series that I did, where there can be such a fear when somebody has grown up in a narcissistic household, and that fear of taking up any sort of space because I don't want to be demanding. I don't want to ask for anything because I don't want to be manipulative. I don't want to be self-centered. I don't want to be in any way entitled. And one of the examples,
get it anyway.
Which
I won't get it anyway when I ask.
No, and that's the thing, because you're shamed. So you've never got healthy eyes on you. You've never got healthy attunement. You've never got healthy care, concern, empathy. You've been shamed for it. So then it's this that is showing up then when we feel any sort of healthy narcissism. So I just want to start with that and throw it back to you, Ruth, and see.
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
From within this framework of healthy narcissism, what's the difference between healthy narcissism and good self-esteem?
To me, they're akin. To healthy self-esteem, healthy self-worth, healthy narcissism, they're akin. And those words are much more palatable when we're talking about self-worth and self-esteem. I think we're talking about the same thing.
Because that's one thing that I'd struggle to kind of distinguish maybe apart.
Mm-hmm.
I have difficulty with the term healthy narcissism for obvious reasons, right?
Understandably
and I'm sure that some of your listeners might be going, what? When they're listening to that too. And I think that that's fair. But I suppose maybe I prefer the term healthy self-esteem or good self-esteem because it feels less pathologized. Where for me, the understanding of narcissism is some sort of malignant narcissism or some sort of, there's some malevolence to it maybe.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's necessarily the case for someone who's healthy self-esteem and isn't afraid to pursue their interests and their needs and their wants and their desires, which is, as you say, right and proper and healthy and as it ought to be, I was
Oh, sorry, go
Oh,
on.
sorry, I was thinking, there's a stage in childhood development, the explorer stage, where they completely disregard any and all people around them. And I'm thinking of my wee chap who's not long out of this phase, where he's just hell-bent on his own agenda. And that's absolutely right and proper, and as it should be. And like, if he is trying to get two blocks together, let me tell you, you can offer him the world and he's just not going to budge until he gets his wee task completed, or what he wants to achieve completed. And that's right, and as he should be. That's a healthy stage in development, around the curious toddler stage, as they call it.
It is. And I actually call that healthily narcissistic, because the child at that
Absolutely.
age, the baby and the 2-year-old, does not care if you haven't eaten. They do not care if you haven't slept. They do not care if you're trying to have a
Yeah.
conversation about something fun or serious with your partner, or you haven't seen a friend in so long. They are they are so entitled and demanding and narcissistic, because they have to learn empathy. They have to
Yeah.
learn all these things, that the whole world doesn't revolve around them. And we talked about this in one of the episodes. Is it possible to love your child too much? And we were talking about there's a difference between loving your child and then not holding them accountable or even teaching them empathy. One of the reasons that, and I'll speak for myself when we were putting it in the book, one of the reasons that I thought it was so important was because around the specific language and the specific traits of NPD. So when we're talking about the 5 main traits, grandiosity, but in particular the others, the entitlement, the exploitation, motivational empathy, and impaired self-awareness. And so what I see with my clients is anytime that they healthily want to be considered, or let's even say in a relationship, they want it to be reciprocal, right? What they're noticing is that I feel entitled for some time. I feel entitled for you to ask me a question. I feel entitled to be seen. And that word, whenever they feel that sense of entitlement, it really can shut them down, and they really can be triggered so much by it, because it reminds them so much of their narcissistic parent. Like, who am I to ask for the attention to be on me? Like, I want the attention to be on me. Understandably, this is a relationship. And so then that is where I think this language to really, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, undoctrinate the belief that we have that we in any way are doing what they're doing. So let's say entitlement. I talk about healthy entitlement. Let's say here in Ireland, that if you're pregnant, that you get 26 weeks maternity leave, that you get an hour for lunch every, 4 hours you work, that you get 4 weeks paid holidays a year. And I was saying, that's healthy entitlement. You are entitled to be treated with respect at work and not be bullied. Like, that's healthy entitlement. That's rights, which all go back to being treated as a human and with self-respect. And in that podcast, when I was saying, if anybody was listening to this from another country where they weren't getting those benefits and there was anger, I was saying that's healthy anger. And that's in no way going into, again, my fear with narcissism, that's superiority or grandiosity, saying we're the best.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. Loads of problems here with government and everything. I'm in no way saying that. But that's what healthy entitlement looks like. And so the same then with exploitation. A lot of people feel so scared to ask their friend for something. In case I'm putting you in a position that you can't say no, or in case I tell you how much I'm struggling with it.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say, hey, Ruth, I'm having a really bad day today. Can you do something for me? Because shit, I know what that's like. That's guilt tripping. That's motivational empathy.
Yeah.
And all of these things, what you're talking about, is absolutely right. Healthy self-worth, healthy self-esteem. And the differences, and the difference between what I see, and I'm going to put it back to you, what you see the difference in any of this, and then NPD, is when
Yeah.
they do it, it's all for their own gain, and they don't care who they have to hurt and abuse to get there, because it's all for power and dominance. Whereas here, it's not. In fact, it's going so far the other way that there's such consideration for the other person. And then even bringing it back to self, such fear that I don't want to be that person, that then I'm going to make myself so much smaller and not take up space and not have my voice. So that's the reason I thought it was important to use that language and those traits specifically. But I completely agree with you that the term healthy narcissism, it's loaded.
It's loaded, but you're hitting on something I think really crucial there, because there's something very, certainly I see it come up time and time again in the therapy room, this fear that I'm going to become a narcissist, right?
Yeah.
If I meet any of my needs, if I ask for what it is that I want, if I step for a moment out of the people pleaser fawn mode, the scapegoat mode at all, then I am instantly the narcissist. And it's like, that doesn't necessarily follow at all. Like, we all have the propensity, with the right circumstances, to act in narcissistic ways or to have narcissistic traits. But just because I stop being a doormat doesn't mean that I am instantly an abuser.
Yes. Or that just hit.
Radicalization and
stop
polarization.
being a doormat, that
Yes.
doesn't mean I'm a narcissist.
No.
Yeah. I also think then, so we're going to use these terms then, I think, interchangeably throughout. So absolutely, Ruth, you stick with your self-worth, self-esteem, and I'm going to use the terminology then, healthy narcissism, for the purpose of this. Because one thing that then I see that has been brought up then in this letter is when this listener is asking, my youngest child has been diagnosed as autistic. The more I've learned about it and neurodivergence in general, and I'm actually going to stop there. Neurodivergence, we are all neurodiverse, all of us. And then there's neurodivergent, where we diverge off neurodivergence. But I know that sort of, we say that there's neurodivergence in the family, but everyone is neurodiverse. That's the diversity with skin color, with eye color, with hair color. There's a diversity, and then somebody divergent off that path. And then she's going on to say, the more I can see, there seems to be a lot of similarities between narcissism and own agenda behaviours. This is the part, you can have your own agenda, but this listener, I think when she's talking about narcissism here, she is, from my understanding, Ruth, she's talking about NPD, narcissistic, right? Not her healthy narcissism.
No.
And in that context then, narcissism is exploitative. Narcissism is abusive. And own agenda behaviours are not. And that's I think fundamentally the difference. But I think what I actually even see in the parenting community that I have, there is so many fears that parents have, and they are so scared to speak it, that when they are met with the child that is demanding their own autonomy, demanding the thing that they want, getting so angry or disappointed that they didn't get the thing that they want. Typically, they understand this at the age of 2, right? Everybody understands that the 2-year-old has all those main attributes and characters. But when they're seeing this in their child at 7 or 9, or particularly like 12, 13, where it's going to come in heavy, where they're really striving for their own autonomy, their friends are the most important thing in the world, mom, dad, like, yous know nothing, like, yous don't have a clue, and it is all about me. If they want something, they want it now. That is developmentally appropriate. That is absolutely the stage that they should be, and they're pushing back against. When, if you grew up in a narcissistic system, it wouldn't have been healthy to push back against. It wouldn't have been healthy to be able to connect to your fight response, right? Typically, you would flight, freeze, or fawn away from the parent, because to fight is futile and you get attacked. And so then to be confronted with your child, your teenage child, I hear a lot of this, especially when there's teenage boys, that then they're aggressive, and when I ask them, who does this remind you of? They will say it really sheepishly and with such fear, going, my mother or father, like, I am, I'm seeing those traits and I don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going into actually, okay, what trigger is here? Because in that relationship with your mother or father, how did you behave? And so we're seeing the freeze, fawn, or flight. And that is because you were helpless and you had no other choice. But here in the parental relationship, you actually hold healthy power here. But it's this trigger that's happening. Ruth, I'm going to throw, am I going too deep too quick? Are you
what
with
I
me?
do want to do is, I want to jump in for listeners that may not be familiar with the term, with a bit of a definition of own agenda behaviours, if that's okay.
Yeah, please do.
Just in case anyone's wondering, it's when an individual ignores social cues, group instructions, or established routines to pursue their own interests, or sometimes it's referred to as marching to their own beat, or the beat of their own drum. So, which I don't know, it might be a little bit trivializing the whole thing, but like in fairness to this listener who sent this letter, and in deference to what you're saying there about us getting triggered into being maybe hypervigilant almost to behaviours that remind us of narcissistic people in our lives, these behaviors can come across as really selfish in the moment, and they can appear at surface level as being really non-cooperative. I'm even thinking, for example, of pathological demand avoidance, which can be really challenging for parents. And wanting to acknowledge also, going back a little even further, this listener mentioned that she quite recently had this diagnosis for her child, and that's a huge thing for any parent to get. It can be a source of comfort in some ways because it's giving us an explanation, some framework to tackle situations, maybe some resources and stuff. But it can also be deeply distressing for parents to get these kinds of diagnoses. And wanting to acknowledge that for this listener as well, and what a roller coaster it can be when you get this diagnosis. But when you're dealing with something like pathological demand avoidance, and I stress that this listener didn't mention that, I'm just curious whether or not there might be a little bit in the mix with her child, but it's like this extreme difficulty complying with any sort of direction. Now, on the daily, that's hugely disruptive to a household, to a school, to any sort of situation. And it can most certainly come across as, would you not just cooperate? You're being so selfish here. Come on now, just, this is for your benefit too. But there's this real, meeting a real resistance, a complete denial, refusal, ignoring demands completely, or requests even, and you can cajole till your heart's content. It's not going to happen. It's an immovable object. But there's something about, on the surface at least, that feels hugely selfish, non-cooperative, disruptive, all of those things. So I get why this listener is kind of saying, do you know what? I'm noticing a bit of a pattern here, that this person is as resistant to taking accountability for their behaviors as maybe other people I've experienced in my life. In other words, narcissists. But for me, the key difference is the function of the behavior.
Yes.
That's what's really significantly different in this case, because with somebody with, for example, pathological demand avoidance, what they're doing is they're retreating into their routine behaviors, their safe behaviors, as a way of defending against extreme anxiety that they're experiencing a lot of the time. So there's no intention to be disruptive. There's no intention to be non-compliant. There's only an intention to, I'm on fire here, I need my support behaviors. That's the only intention behind it, or the only function behind it. Versus somebody who we'll say is narcissistic, who you're constantly looking for the narcissistic supply. So looking for attention, looking for an ego boost. So their behaviors, selfish behaviors, for want of a better word, are the function of them is to support their fragile ego, not to support their anxiety. And that's a really key shift or difference in the function of the behavior. Massive.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned PDA. I talk about this on messaging again in the CAM method. And the first thing, even before I mention PDA, I ask the group that I have, and all coming from dysfunctional family backgrounds, and I say, what is it like for you if your husband, friend, partner turns around and tells you to do something that says, will you hoover the floor? Not even a question, like empty that dishwasher, right? And I say, notice what you feel in your body. And 90% of them have a resistance that, like, don't tell me what to do. And it really grates with them. Even then, if there's the fear that the person might be upset and they'll fawn. But it is that grating part, right? I don't like to be told what to do. And I ask them, why? And they're like, because the words, they're like, well, yeah, I feel like I'm not being respected. I'm an adult. I'm not being asked. I'm being told. And I feel very much like I'm a child. And so then it's like, okay, so there's a denial of autonomy here. And then I bring in PDA. And because there's two definitions that people go by. One is the pathological demand avoidance. And I personally really don't like that one. I like the other one that people use is the persistent drive for autonomy. And that is, you named it there, that intense obsessive resistance to ordinary demands of life. So if you have a child, this is everything is a battle, telling them to, and see, I'm saying telling them to brush their teeth, or even asking them, because a lot of the times we're actually not asking. Even if we say, will you brush your teeth? We're not asking, we are telling. And then they have high levels of anxiety that's triggered when they perceive this loss of autonomy. And it's a nervous system is interpreting this, that this is not safe. They are seeing you as the threat. Their nervous system is responding, and they are in fight or flight. And that is, I think, such a critical distinction, that this is a matter of my nervous system won't allow me. It's I can't and not I won't. So I always talk about it through the lens of the nervous system. And this is safety seeking behavior rather than power and dominance over. Such
and
a
control.
difference. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I wonder when this listener then is actually talking about this, and she's saying that I can see it. Did she say, let me find it here. The more I've learned about neurodivergence in general, the more I can see that there seems to be a lot of similarities. And then she's saying, I want to forgive so I can be free. I think that's really
my goodness.
interesting. So firstly, maybe to draw an end to the previous part, I think, Ruth, we're both saying that in no way, if somebody is autistic or PDA or any way neurodivergent, that in no way makes them in any way abusive. And by the way, there's nowhere in this letter that this listener is saying this, or there's nowhere that she is conflating the two. But I just want to be very clear as well. There's no way in any way, I think it's really harmful that if anybody attempts to diagnose a child as NPD, I think that's very harmful. We don't do that. And to conflate autism or NPD, the two do not conflate. As an adult, can you have somebody that is autistic and abusive? Absolutely. But one does not go with the other. One does not mean that the other one has. And I wonder then, when this listener is saying, I want to forgive so that I can be free, I wonder, is there something in that sentence that I see possibly that my mother or father are autistic, or maybe ADHD, one of them, or both ADHD, or they're on the spectrum somewhere. I wonder, is it that this listener is maybe saying, I want them to acknowledge maybe that they're neurodivergent so I can forgive to be free, but they're not acknowledging it. And I hear this listener, how much she loves her children, right? You had talked about the difficulty and the grief, both grief and relief at getting a diagnosis.
Yeah.
But even to get to that point, the years of turmoil and questioning and battles and rows in a home, like that is huge, even to get to that point. And then you're right, this roller coaster. So I love that she's saying that I have set some strong boundaries and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to protect my children. I just want to absolutely applaud you there. Ruth, I wonder what you're hearing in this part, that I want to forgive so that I can be free. And I wonder, is that linked to them acknowledging if there's autism in the family?
Well, I certainly, like, the first question I had, and as always, love that people only share what they want to share and hold their boundaries. That's so important. But I was curious, like, free from what, first and foremost? What is holding you captive? What is holding you? What's imprisoning you? Is what I wanted to ask this listener. Is it your grief for the loss of your parents, or the parents that you coulda, woulda, shoulda had? Is it your guilt that you're still holding on to? Is it some sense of toxic obligation that you're holding on to? What is it that's holding you from freedom?
That is such a good question. And here, because neither sets of families want to acknowledge that any damage was done, and have made it clear that they think I've gone down the autism rabbit hole. So what
does that even mean, the autism rabbit hole?
What I want, and the same, right? There's boundary here. So I am assuming or presuming is something here, but gone down the autism rabbit hole. I hear this as well when clients say that their parents say, oh, you've gone down the therapy route, right? You've got lost in therapy. You've gone down the labeling route. And that you've gone down a rabbit hole. You've gone down, think of Alice in Wonderland. You've gone down an imaginary rabbit hole. You've got lost in non-factual.
I suppose what I'm asking is it another way to dismiss my very genuine, real life concerns about somebody's very unacceptable behavior? It's just another way of minimizing my experience. And now when I come to challenge you with it, you're dismissive again.
I wonder, even when we're talking here, I wonder For this listener, when she was able to piece the pieces together of this jigsaw, right? Because she's saying the confusion that I felt, which you feel when you grow up in a dysfunctional narcissistic family system. And so here, this podcast and other work that she has done, being able to put this pieces of the puzzle together. But here then, when she got her youngest diagnosed as autistic, going down this autism rabbit hole, right? Going and what I'm hearing is research and finding factual information by credible doctors and sources. But I wonder, was there a hope ignited in the listener? Oh my God, this makes sense. Yes, if this is my child, if this is me, do I relate here? Or is this my mother and father? And oh my God, and I can see it in this person and this person. Is this hopeful now that I've answers to go back? Not even confrontational, but to explain the behaviours. And I wonder if there was hope in that I forgive you, this isn't your fault. Like you are clearly autistic. I mean, this fits it.
I hear the hope, but you see this, it wasn't your fault piece.
And
I mean,
I
no
put that
doubt.
in. Let me just say that's not in the letter, but that's that when there's
No,
hope.
yeah, but I hear that. It's very live, and there is a thread of that in the letter for sure. So I don't think you're plucking that from the sky either. But I sit with that and I go, okay, look at if everyone, let's pretend everyone in this scenario is on the spectrum, right? We definitely make allowances and we make accommodations for folks that are on the spectrum, of course. But also there are consequences for inappropriate behavior. So there's a difference. I'm always banging on about this, but there's a difference between reasons and excuses for our behavior. Even if there was ASD running through the families of origin for this listener, that doesn't necessarily at all excuse abhorrent behavior or unacceptable behavior. It might lend us a little bit more understanding or give us a reason. But my question is, why do I need reasons and understanding to be free? Why do I need to forgive to be free? Can I be free without having to reach this radical stage of maybe radical acceptance? I mean, I'm a big fan of acceptance, of course, but it doesn't mean that we have to be at peace with what happened to us to move on and be free.
I absolutely agree. And I want to come back to that bit because I am fundamentally in agreement with you that we don't have to forgive in order to be free, that's a choice. But there's something again that I feel really strongly in this part then. And I wonder with the confusion, is it that, well, if it's this, if it is autism, if it is ASD, I wonder was this listener minimizing then the abuse herself, that internal self-gaslighting, that this would explain it. Whereas, like you're saying, that yes, we can make accommodations, but that does not explain abuse. That does not explain harm. And there's such a difference when you are the parent of a child that's on the spectrum, whose brain isn't fully developed, who is really struggling with the overwhelming noise sensitivity or texture sensitivity or emotional sensitivity, and they're overwhelmed by everything and having a meltdown and then being reactive or PDA and being angry because they want that autonomy, that they want to have choice, that they want their nervous system to go out of fight or flight. That is very different because this listener can see, and it sounds like she's already done it, when you are the adult, when you are the parent, you do anything you can for your child, and you have done it. And because that is not easy to get a diagnosis, to go down this route. There's such a wrong myth out there that this is somehow an easy option. It is not, and just get your child a label. Absolutely not. This is a hard road to go down. But you have done that because you have seen your child and the struggles that they have had, and possibly even the remorse after when your child has had a meltdown, feeling bad, feeling guilty. Mom, what's wrong with me? Or trying to explain, all these feelings. When we're talking about NPD, somebody doesn't have that remorse. There's such a lack of self-awareness. The other person doesn't exist because they're only there to serve their needs. And this is key. Even here as an adult, you took something to your parents and they completely ignored, dismissed, minimized that idea that you've gone down an autism rabbit hole. That even there's such disgust nearly when somebody's saying that, oh, you've gone down a rabbit hole. Like nearly that what's not being said is nearly that you're crazy, right? That you're on a, what's that? You know, what's conspiracy theories? Oh, you've gone down a rabbit
Oh,
hole, like this conspiracy theory, and you're being dismissed. And again, inverted commas, wrong in their eyes.
yeah.
Here, you're
And
not
I
being heard.
wondered about
Here
that.
is the harm.
Yeah.
Here is, you know, what we're seeing, the abuse, that when you don't get to have an opinion, when you don't get to even present facts, that they know everything, where you are dismissed and minimized,
The blame shifting in
the
that
blame shifting.
phenomenon.
And your
Unbelievable.
parents were the adults. Their brains were fully developed. They held the power. And with NPD, they abuse their power. They abuse their position. A child doesn't abuse their position because they're a child. They don't hold power, and they're trying to gain it and ascertain
Carve a
it.
little out
Yeah.
for themselves. And, you know, I wondered, the messaging for this listener was so strong around always being wrong.
Yeah.
I couldn't help but wonder if perhaps there was messaging around you're wrong unless you forgive as well. Because I wondered about that keeping her on the hook, keeping her from being free. This insistence that I have to find forgiveness in some way to be free. What kind of messaging might she have received from a narcissist, right? Growing up, that you're always wrong and now you have to forgive. Forgive me for all of and any transgressions, or else there's consequences.
And you're saying how the language that would show up, because, yeah, when it's so covert, it generally isn't as overt and obvious as that, as forgive me. Because if I say forgive me, I'm even going to have to acknowledge that there's something to forgive. So it's normally, if you're bringing up something that, oh, you're like a dog with a bone, you can never let anything go, you're holding a grudge, why can't you just get over it? Why can't you be more like X, Y, or Z? Why are you living in the past? Why can't we just move on? It's
Why are
all
you going
this.
down rabbit holes?
There you go. Yeah. Why are you going down rabbit holes? And it's all to brush everything under the rug, to just completely ignore it, to have huge either rouse battles, attacks. And then the next day or 2 days later, you're just supposed to carry on as if nothing happened, because they don't want to be held accountable. And this is where an enabling parent really comes in strong, because they don't hold the abuser accountable either. And they are complicit then in the abuse. They enable it.
Yeah.
Again, this listener doesn't say much. There's generally, a lot of the times as well, it can be, there's such religious elements here that can seep in. Again, I don't know for this listener, but, you know, when I think even Ireland, a Catholic country, you know, and weaponization of language, of scripture, like honor thy father and mother, that that does not mean tolerate abuse. Be the bigger person. That's another one that we hear. I mean, like, what the fuck? Be the bigger person. Again, it's tolerate the abuse, but everybody that will have heard that line knows what that means, and they don't question it. It shuts down your critical brain. It's a self-terminating cliche that when it's said, like, don't rock the boat, right? Boats are supposed to rock. But when everybody hears that, it just stops them dead in their tracks, because they know what it means. And be the bigger person is tolerate this, accept this, keep quiet, keep your mouth shut, don't bring this up again. But there's like some moralistic implication that you're being the bigger person.
Yeah.
It's such bullshit, and it's language of control.
I'm even thinking, Katie, and this is my facetiousness maybe seeping in, but I'm thinking of a previous episode that we did where we talked about food messaging and the control and power around that, and be the bigger person, but, you know, also lose weight and be smaller. I mean,
my
there's
God, yeah.
conflicting messages that often come up around that. Even
Yeah.
it's such a mind fuck. Like
It is. It like that hits. Like when I hear that, it's like, yeah, no wonder it was confusing.
so
And
confusing.
when this listener is talking about that, I was so confused, no wonder. And then I wonder, is this part then when she is discovering ASD? And yes, if it's in your family, there is a high chance, you know, that it's going to be here in your, that you're noticing it in your family of origin. But I wonder, this part where she's looking for freedom, I wonder, is it to, again, put in that jigsaw puzzle that I have it, that I understand it. Whereas abuse, it doesn't make sense. Only that they want power and control and dominance over. And that is such a hard reality to accept. You're talking about radical acceptance. That is such a hard one to accept.
I was only talking to somebody during the week in the therapy room who had been forced into this role or position as scapegoat and couldn't understand, but I didn't do anything wrong, and the frustration around and the will to search for my misdemeanor. What did I do to find myself out in the cold and in this scenario? And the reality was, I found myself saying to him, look, it doesn't make sense. It's not supposed to make sense. And maybe the only thing to do is to set down your will, your striving to find a reason, because you can be put into the scapegoat position and punished for absolutely nothing. Even if you're not guilty of the crime you're accused of, it doesn't matter. It doesn't make sense all the time when you're dealing with somebody with narcissistic traits at all. And there's something about setting down that striving to find a reason. I'm thinking of this listener. Oh, my heart is heavy saying this even, but I'm like all this messaging around never being right. Like, how much does that undermine my own experience in the world? How much does that mean that I lose faith in my own perception of what I'm living? And how do I carry that forward then as an adult and second guess? I'm presuming there has to be some second guessing in the mix for this listener, and this uncertainty. And am I right? Is this okay? And how do you heal that level of undermining of my own perception and my own experience in the world?
There's
And I
such
see
pain.
this. It's so hard because I see this listener striving so hard for answers and struggling to get an answer. And what if there isn't an answer?
Mm. That's the confusion is destabilizing. And that when you then said earlier, when you were talking about that for somebody, that, this doesn't make sense, and to put down that part of trying to find answers. And I always talk about this kind of juxtaposition of healing. On this one side, psychoeducation is so important to find answers, to have names. It literally grounds a person. It anchors them to have names for the behaviours. There's such a huge part of it. And then there's a part where we can stay stuck in that and trying to understand more and more and more and learn more and more and more to avoid when you were talking about this listener with freedom, that what is there, and that part of the confusion, the destabilization, that is the point of abuse. Because when you don't have solid ground to stand on, when you are confused, when you are destabilized, when it is like whiplash, going like, what the fuck? Like, there's this, there's that, I don't understand. When we're talking about healthy self-esteem, it will be on the floor if you're wrong the whole time. And then when you have low self-esteem, you are easier to abuse. You are easier to control when you don't know what's happening. Like when we, look at any sort of torture that people go under. Do you know what I mean? Confusion, leaving lights on, like we're confusing them purposefully, right?
Yeah.
Because it's psychological torture.
Yeah.
And here, that part, when we're talking about healing, looking back at that child, she was confused. That younger child, that inner child, she was confused. And I think that there's a part when putting down that, finding the definitive answer, I think it leaves room for that grief, for that anger, for maybe even that rage. And I think that that's a part that you really have to embody that to feel that. And often the child can feel so helpless. So if I go to this part, that's a helplessness. That's such a grief. That's so heavy. I don't want to feel helpless, right? In parts work, my inner child, I don't want to feel helpless. No, I'm powerful. Let me find the answers. Let me do this. Right? And we're back then in the flight, because look how energizing it is and look how powerful it is. And this is the point of survival. This works for us in survival, but it can be detrimental to us then in adulthood.
So working on building my tolerance for uncertainty, right?
This is done so slowly in therapy, that when there's these exiled parts and somebody hasn't connected them, because it can be overwhelming, especially when we get to that feeling of helplessness. And in a narcissistic family system, never even mind in a narcissistic family system, a child is helpless when they're born. Right? They are helpless. They can't do anything for themselves. And even through their whole life, there's so many times that they need support and help, understandably. And even as an adult, we need it.
Yeah.
But this part then, when you are faced with a bear in front of you, helplessness is not going to serve you, but that's what we feel. And so then there is this split and we go into survival mode, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And that is healthy if we are around a bear to survive. But afterwards, we toggle out of it. We're met with support and care, and we're able to readjust and toggle
To be a
back
short-term thing, right?
short-term, back into our parasympathetic nervous system. But in childhood, with a narcissistic parent, we become stuck in one of the 4Fs. And then we think that that is our personality.
Yeah.
And so it is going back to these parts. And back to that question, Ruth, when you asked earlier, is around this question, so I can be free. What does she want to be free of?
Yeah.
And you mentioned, let's go over them again. You mentioned free from guilt, free from toxic obligation. You mentioned a third. Can you remember what that was?
Guilt, toxic obligation. Geez, I'm forgetting myself
maybe
now.
free from confusion.
Yeah.
I wonder free from anger, because I wonder how angering it is that you have been dismissed again, right? This part that if I have the answer, I want to forgive them. There is something in that going, it is this and not this. Yeah, I think that there could have been hope here. And then again, to be devastated by grief and hurt, free from hurt, I'm wrong again in their eyes. And to be free from them, they don't need to be free from all those feelings. They don't need to do anything, but this is the work of feeling them. And I am so sorry that this is on you. This is the part, like, the younger child doesn't have to forgive what was done to them. That was wrong. You know, you as an adult can make any choices that you want to do now, but you don't have to force a younger part of you to forgive. You don't even have to force the adult part of you to forgive. You mentioned forgiveness earlier, and maybe if we just end on that, Ruth, what your thoughts are around forgiveness, especially if these messages have been so insidious through family, micro, through macro society.
And I think that there's a religiosity in it as well. There's something about absolution and forgiveness that's very heavily laden with all of those kind of cultural and religious undertones, right? That to forgive is divine, and all those messaging that we get from religion in particular. But there's something about, well, what if it was unforgivable? What happened? What if the damage was unforgivable? And what if it's okay for me to say, okay, do you know what? I may not reach a place of forgiveness, but I'm able and free to move forward in a healthier way and choose not to have. Because one of the things I was wondering about was, is it a freedom from the threat of ongoing abuse, perhaps, that this listener could be
freedom
looking
of
for?
fear.
Freedom of fear and anxiety and waiting for the hammer to drop. That we've heard that time and again from your listeners' letters, that there's this fear of what'll be land in the postbox, what'll show up at the door. Will somebody be trying the gate at the side? We hear this time and again, this under siege threat. So maybe there's something about a very live freedom of that, freedom of fear of threat, and freedom to move about my world without threat, without the fear that somebody's going to accost me in some kind of way.
There's something is that as you're talking, I nearly have an image of an umbilical cord being attached, right, when we're talking about freedom. And the narcissistic parent doesn't allow for freedom and autonomy. They do silent treatment and discard, which again, the only purpose of that is to get you to fawn and come back. There isn't freedom and celebration of your autonomy. And so I think that is the part for this listener. What is it that you want to be free from? And whatever that is, your narcissistic parent can't give that to you.
Yeah.
This is something that you have to work to cut the umbilical cord. I see this with my clients as well with anger. I'm so angry at them. Valid. And I think a lot of therapists skip over the anger way too quick. The anger needs to have a voice, be able to get in touch with that healthy anger, even that inner child rage and pain. And when we process that, then there is freedom from that, because it's that can keep us tethered.
Yeah.
And Ruth, something that you say so many times throughout the letters is, what can they do now? So the fear is often back to the little child self, that they can have dominance and control over me. That woman with the postbox, like, what can she do if you meet her? Like, you have already defied her. So you, to this listener, you have already defied them by seeing your own child, by meeting their needs. And yes, it's going to be difficult. And I have huge empathy and compassion for you. You have got a diagnosis, so you have gone against whatever their view or belief of anything is. You are autonomous in this. You are carving out your own path. And
Yeah.
I wonder, I think it could be multifaceted here, but I wonder, was there some part of hope that was still in this? And that can linger for loads of people. We think that it's gone, and then it can show up in other ways.
Absolutely. And I wanted to mention when it comes to autism and MPD, narcissism, that is, I wanted to mention something on psychological inflexibility, right? So psychological inflexibility, and I'm hoping that this is going to maybe give the listeners something to hold on to in terms of our own healing moving forward. But psychological inflexibility is when we're really fixed and rigid in our thinking. And that's a really common feature in autism. And I wonder if this listener is noticing that in her wee one. But there's something really key about that and the distinguishing between autism and MPD. And that is, with somebody who's on the spectrum, there's a real difficulty and inability to be flexible in our thinking. We tend towards rigid routines, and any deviation from them, ill-tolerated, all of that stuff. But with NPD, what we're talking about is a willful refusal to have any sort of psychological flexibility, especially when it comes to my accountability for various misdemeanors and things that I've done wrong. And that's a really important distinction to make. In ASD, it's very, very unconscious, not designed with any sort of agenda behind it. With MPD, it's very, very conscious and very willful and very, designed to get my way, if that makes sense. And there's something in that I wanted to say to this listener. When it comes to psychological inflexibility, that can keep us imprisoned. There's something about building my tolerance, and I know I said this already, but building my tolerance for uncertainty, building my tolerance for not having the answers, can be a form of building psychological flexibility that's really, really healthy for us. So what I'm asking this listener to do is to sit with the not knowing and not be tempted to run from that or seek answers or demand answers or all of that stuff that we do. And that maybe there's a hint of that she might be engaging in here, but rather just make a home for the uncertainty in your body and have a little bit more flexibility around your thinking, around the whys and wherefores and the reasons and the excuses and all of that stuff. Having or building a little bit of tolerance or a little more tolerance for the not knowing might just free you a little more, because the psychological inflexibility, that rigid thinking, that's the prison a lot of the time.
I love that, Ruth. And speaking of that, on flexibility, this was a short letter. We're respecting boundaries, but we both have acknowledged that we have made hypotheses and made assumptions or presumed and asked questions. So take what works for you and leave what doesn't. There is no hidden agenda here in any way from myself and Ruth. I think it's amazing the work that you have done and are doing to ground yourself. And I understand that search for answers and the boundaries. I just want to commend and applaud you for protecting your children. That is amazing. That is breaking the cycle right there. And anything that you disagree with or doesn't fit for you, because we were talking about different clients and different groups, set that down. That wasn't for you, and that is okay. And here, you are allowed to disagree or be angry, or here, we can be wrong in this. We will accept that we were wrong here when we're talking about that, and take full accountability. And I think we owned it throughout.
We're only wondering and supposing.
Yes, we're only wondering. Yeah.
So I completely agree with you, Katie. By all means, I love being wrong a lot of the time, right? Because it means that I'm human. And certainly I make 6 mistakes on the daily before breakfast, but there's something about Take what's meaningful and leave what's not. I always love when you say that, Katie, because it's so true. We're only spitballing here
And
based on what you
that's
told.
the trust in you and the trust that you see in your kids and trust in your own emotions.
Love that.
And yeah, I think with that, Ruth, I think that's a good place to wrap up and leave it. Yeah. And just for you, the listener, just mind yourself in the aftermath of that and
Very
see what
best of
you
luck.
need. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Take care of yourself, and well done on coming this far.
Absolutely. And if anyone wants to send me and Ruth a letter, you can email us at I forgot it there for a second, beyond_survival@outlook.com, and we will be back to use next week.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.